What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Mary's Tac-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. My name is Charlie Robinson. I am your host. Thanks for checking us out. If you're watching on Iconic or you are listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. We know there's a lot of podcasts out there, 850,000 of them to be exact. So the fact that you found this at all is amazing. So thank you. I want to thank our sponsors, Scribd. If you are into ebooks or audiobooks or e-magazines, you've got to check out Scribd. They have thousands of them available, $9.99 a month. You can try your first month free. If you don't like it, cancel anytime. The link to Scribd will be in the description box below, so I encourage you to check them out, as well as our other sponsor, which is CuriosityStream. If you are into documentaries, God knows I am, you got to check them out. They have high-definition quality. There are thousands of shows to choose from. You have unlimited streaming. You can stream it to your laptop, your TV, your phone, your tablet. It doesn't matter. It's $2.99 a month. That is 10 cents a day. You have no excuse for not signing up for this. And if you support our sponsors, it directly impacts and supports our show as well. So we certainly do appreciate that. Well, just back from Acapulco, where we were speaking and listening. I have the CEO of The Economic Truth. He is a contributor to World Alternative Media, WHAM, with Josh Sigurdson and Tim Choate. I am talking about John Thore Sneisen. How are you, man? How you doing?
Fantastic. How about you, Charlie?
Good. I like your hat.
Yeah, today it actually says something else. It doesn't say taxation is death today. I thought it was fitting to put Black Swan on there. Since we got some interesting things happening in the economy.
Yeah, we certainly do. Well, you are the author of 2 books. One of them is Canada, Greatest Economy in the World, ? And The End of Freedom, How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us. This should be required reading if you're in college or if you're just a member of the human race, because so much of what has ruined this beautiful planet that we're on and this amazing society has to do with the monetary system. And it's no exaggeration to say that, 1 in 100,000 of us actually even understands how it works. And I don't think that that's accidental. It seems like the people that put this monetary system in place have done that by design to keep us confused and bewildered. And the Rockefellers and Carnegies that financed the education system, they made sure to not explain how the money works, because if you understand how the money works, you would understand that it is a scam. And one of the things that you've done, John, is you have been working with G. Edward Griffin, who wrote the book The Creature from Jekyll Island, which explains the Federal Reserve, and you are involved in the Red Pill Expo, which is going to happen this June 2020, the first week of June, in Jekyll Island, of all places, which is phenomenal.
It's a big
great
one.
Choice. What's that?
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's going to be a big one. It's symbolic, and the speaker list is pretty impressive as well. People can check that out, redpillexpo.com, I think. Is that right?
.org.
.org. Okay.
Yeah.
So at its core, his book was talking about the creation of the Federal Reserve. So no, you've written books on this. So explain it to us like we're a bunch of morons. How does the Federal Reserve work? Is it is it a government bank? Is it a private bank? Is it for our best interest? Is it used to smooth out the ebbs and flows of financial waves? Or is it there by design to destroy the world?
Well, I think there's twofold. I think maybe the bankers had a different idea when they created it. You know, I don't even sometimes I try not to look at it as a conspiracy theory. I just look at it as pure stupidity. Sometimes that's two ways of doing it. Of course, it's a huge conspiracy in my point of view. That's of course what it is. That the creation, they conspired. It was I think it was 1907 or whatever it was when they actually met at Jekyll Island. And then conspired to then create the Federal Reserve. And of course, it was Christmas in Norway. We called Little Christmas, 23rd of December, 1913. They actually pushed the bill through that was the Federal Reserve Act that created the Federal Reserve. So in the Federal Reserve Act, there's some interesting points to take, and that is one of them, of course, is I don't remember the paragraph or whatever it's in, but in the Federal Reserve Act, it actually shows that the Federal Reserve pays 6% per annum to its shareholders. And if you read a little bit further, the shareholders are the local banks in the 12 Federal Reserve districts. So whatever banks has headquarters, let's say in Minneapolis, and surrounding areas where the Minneapolis Fed holds control, they actually get paid dividends from that. Now, I was explained by an economist saying that all that money goes straight back to the Federal Reserve, to the Treasury, because it's there's no way they could actually pay the shareholders, the banks, any money out of this. But that's of course in the Federal Reserve Act, it says that it pays its shareholders. So unless the Treasury is a shareholder, I'm a little bit skeptical on exactly where those profits of all the massive money creation that of course the Federal Reserve is one part of. It's a small actually part of the money creation scheme. The biggest part of the money creation scheme is the banksters themselves that can create excessive amounts of money. If we can, just in my book, actually, I have examples on how it works. The problem today, though, is that it doesn't even work that way anymore, mostly because they actually strayed away from it because it's too leveraged, the system and so on. But let me just go, through kind of a 101 banking, how, the actual banking system works. So what happens initially is that, the government itself goes out and wants to borrow money. So they do deficit spending, right? Where you see today, it's the deficit is 1.1 trillion, or unofficially, the numbers are more 1.4, 1.5 trillion. Some people even say that, it's as much as, 21 trillion that have been missing of money that is potentially, created by the Federal Reserve that nobody knows where it is. But let's just, go with the official numbers, which is 1.1 trillion-ish, close to that right now. So they just borrow. Let's make it simple. Let's just do $100 to make it simple, just for everybody here. So okay, so the government, wants to borrow money. It has a deficit. It's got to, borrow money at $100. So what they do is they actually create a bond on the Treasury side. The Treasury then gives that bond to the Federal Reserve, and then they give them fresh money back in Federal Reserve notes in a bank account. Well, today it's not fresh notes anymore. It's just digital digits in a bank account, of course. But so that gets created. Then, of course, these bonds then get sold onto the market through the primary dealers, which is the major banks. Mostly JP Morgan is the number one primary dealer in the world. And then you have other underlying banks. Now, it's interesting. We kind of talked when we were in Acapulco about, who potentially is, for all the mergers and acquisitions through the banking system, who's really owning these banks. So it's hard to really somebody should really take time and actually drill back in time and take a look at who is the underlying, owners of all these banks. Of course, there's public shareholders. There's a lot of it today, but I think there's others too as well that have, underlying debt that they borrowed to these banks that are, basically, over. They're more, hiding under there that they actually, fund these banks potentially. So it's hard to tell exactly how it works. But so you create that $100, it gets sold onto the market, but then now the government, the Treasury, has $100 in their bank account. Well, so now what can happen, because they can deposit into JP Morgan, they can deposit into Wells Fargo, but at Wells Fargo, there's fake bank accounts, so I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't trust any banks, but they could just deposit it into any bank, of course. And that bank now, at this moment, when it has, so this is how it used to work. I'll tell you kind of how it does work in a bit, but I just want to show you how the whole fractional reserve banking system works. So what happens is that they deposit the $100 into the bank. Now that $100, what's interesting is what they do is they actually take. I just got to look at this because it's a while sometimes since I look at exactly explaining this. But they take a $90, what's called an excessive reserve. The excessive reserve of $90. Now that $90, you might think, okay, that's going to be taken away from the $100 that were just deposited. Well, no, you're wrong, because that $90 of the $100 that's now in the bank account, the bank now, that bank that got it deposited into its deposit account, can now create another $90 on top of that $100. So now suddenly you have $190 in existence, and they have something called an excessive reserve. So you're supposed to have like 10% of all the money that you have in a reserve in itself. But the problem is now we have 190, so that's not even 10% anymore. And then, of course, that $90 could get borrowed out to someone through a car loan, through a mortgage, and so on, be part of all that. And then it gets suddenly deposited into another bank, for example. When that $90 get deposited in there, they take another excessive reserve of that, which is $9 in the reserve. And then $81 gets created in excessive reserve again. So now suddenly, just by two deposits here, so basically it was a deposit of $100. They created $90 that they then lent out. And then again, that got deposited by, let's say somebody bought a car. Now that money got deposited in another bank. Now that bank creates another $81 on top of it. So suddenly you have new money that has been created from that initial $100 that the government put in to the account. That's now $271. We're not going to go far. Just going to do one more step here. But as you can see, this goes pretty fast initially, the amount of money that gets accumulated. So then again, the $81 then gets borrowed from that bank to maybe a car loan or mortgage, whatever it is. And then that get $81 from that bank gets deposited into another bank. And then they created another excessive reserve. It goes over and over again here. And that excessive reserve is $72.9. And now suddenly you got $349.3 created out of thin air of new money in just 3 deposits from the initial deposit by the bank. And in total, in fractional reserve banking, I did actually this example. They could do basically it's not. I don't think it's exactly $1,000, but it's $999.99 something that this gets created. So it's basically $1,000 out of 100. So you basically tenfold the money supply. So think about this: when you borrow $1 trillion, okay, the government borrowed $1 trillion and then deposit it. Get it deposited into a bank, the money that, if you do this on $1 trillion basis instead of the $100, well, now we're not talking about, at $90 in excessive reserve. You're talking about a crazy amount. Like, what would that be now? That would be, so we're looking at 90% of $1 trillion. That would be, what would that be? Yeah, 900 billion. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So $900 billion suddenly gets created. So you see how fast this just goes crazy and blows up. And then from that 900 billion, now you could tenfold that money, and now you suddenly have 9 trillion of new money just from that 1 trillion. So it's just insane how fast it accelerates when you have that. But the problem today is a lot of banks doesn't even have that excessive reserve that's enough anymore. So they usually they do have the excessive reserve in technical terms by having digital money deposited at the Federal Reserve or at any other central bank. But the problem is, if you want to look at real accessible money in cash, I have some great charts that I made just a year ago or two, I think it was, where I went through all the banks. I went through the balance sheet. Then I looked at their cash holdings. The problem today is that they actually show cash holdings together with what's called central bank reserves. So basically what they have at the central bank. But the problem is I looked at, so what's the definition of those deposits that they have at the Federal Reserve? Well, the definition is it could be cash and it could also be electronic money, which I'm pretty sure it's 99% of that they have at the Federal Reserve, or even more, is digital digits that they have. And that's where the repo market comes in. So I'm going to wait with the repo market for a little bit here. But so you can see how fast this money accelerates into the economy, and how it could create pretty big bubbles from, the deposit and having just a $1 trillion deficit from the government. Just wait until the deficit goes up to 3, 4, 5, 10 trillion, whatever it'll be, before this whole thing collapses. Now you could create $1 trillion? No, sorry, $9 trillion, right? And then you add that tenfold again. Now it just blows everybody's mind, because it's just going to be mind-boggling amount of money that will get created through the central bank initially, but mostly by the commercial banks, right? So, it's just crazy how that's how the fractional reserve banking system itself work. But then you have, of course, the overlaying amount. Now we have something called zero reserve policy, which Britain is using, Sweden, Canada is using, where they just entrust the banks themselves to keep sufficient reserves on hand, basically. But the problem is the cash that they actually have, as I got to go back to that, I kind of jump over that. The cash that they actually have in the bank versus the deposits is usually minuscule. So, for example, if people were to want their money back out of the banks, and you would, let's say that you took 10% of the depositors would want their money back. Well, now the bank collapses, because most banks, and this includes JP Morgan and others, they only have 1.9%, but that's including all the money at the Federal Reserve in electronic digits. So they might even have way less than that, in physical hard cash on hand. And that's been seen. I had people there in Canada that tried. There was one guy, he tried to get something like $45 bills. It was just kind of awkward. He wanted to just get that just for fun's sake, and this bank couldn't get up with it. They said, well, give us a day and we'll have the money. And that was just $45 bills. Wow. And people, tried to get deposits out of their banks, let's say $100,000 in cash that they wanted to do something with, and they've been told that could take a couple of months for us to get it. And that was a local credit union here in Winnipeg. So there's a lot. And now, of course, they're coming in with a whole bunch of ban on cash. Australia has recently put in trying now to put in a supervillain law of a max per usage of cash of $10,000 in purchases, and if you go over that, you would be put in prison, literally. So they're really coming after cash, and then that is the Achilles heel of the whole system, because all the way back to the old days when you had the goldsmiths, were lending out IOUs. They started to, this borrowing scheme, and then they started lending out too much IOUs to people, and they didn't have the physical gold. So when people came in and wanted to withdraw their IOUs, they didn't have the gold available, and that's called a bank run. And that was historically, all the way back then, was these bank runs that happened throughout history. And then, of course, the first paper money got created back in 1024 by the Chinese Song Dynasty, and that they actually had a credit bubble at that time. So they created credit At that time in the year thousands, they created a credit bubble that they called it a Chinese economic miracle, and went up and then it went bust basically, and then that's what happens throughout history. Charlie, is that they basically have all these bank runs throughout history because everybody wants to get in on the scam of running a bank, but then the temptation every single time, if you have a central bank or if you have a private bank, the temptation to create more currency into existence that is physically available always it gets misused, and then they create too much of it, and then you get hyperinflations and all this stuff, and they just destroy the currency. And this is the thing you were saying, that central banks are wreak havoc on the world, and they 100% has. You could basically bring you could look back, and this is actually my book, very interesting, a way of looking at it that I put it forward, is the need for dividends for corporations, for example. So what is pushing, corporations is a whole different thing that we could get into, but that would be too long to talk about. But corporations themselves, need to pay dividends to their investors. The problem is that, they constantly have inflation fighting them on the one side, these corporations, sinister or not. They have those the forces by the money creation that is constantly destroying their bottom line too fast, most likely, or what the profit that they can make. So what they are doing is they need to pay a certain dividend, and increase in dividend to the investors, because inflation is going up, so the investors want more dividends. So what that push has created is these corporations need to find cheap ways to make profits, so they get into selling poison to people, and all the food supply, all these sinister corporations. We could look at it on one side where it's just they want to depopulate us, and the other side is also they're just forced into this activity by the sinister creation of money out of thin air that destroys everything that it touches and corrupts everything in society.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you have a printing press in your garage, you will inevitably print too much money.
Actually, I do this with Tim. Sorry, Charlie. There's my printing press.
Well, I think it's interesting for people to know that when you take your money and deposit it into a bank, you probably didn't read the fine print of when you opened your bank account, but when you do that, that money becomes the property of the bank, and you become an unsecured creditor of the bank. So you think you're just going to go down, empty your bank account, get it all out. If there's some sort of, for whatever reason, they can just say, not today, we don't have the money, or not tomorrow, or in the event of some sort of collapse, never. You're not getting your money. And you say, I want my money back. And they say, oh, no, it's our money. You gave it to us. You're an unsecured creditor, which will blow your mind and make you furious and everything, until you go back and they'll say, read your contract. You read your contract and you'll say, holy shit, what have I done? I've put my money in there. And yeah, the FDIC is there to backstop these bank runs, but they're only there to backstop these when like a little local bank, when the bank manager clears out the vault and moves to Hawaii with his girlfriend, then they'll come in and make you whole. But when there is a systemic banking failure,
Wells Fargo, Citibank, right, or other major banks, like this is funny. I have it in. I went through I haven't done it with the FDIC, but the CDIC here in Canada, I looked at the numbers. 0.39% of all the deposits under 100,000 that they're supposed to insure. There's one major bank blows, right? You're screwed, basically.
Yeah. That's crazy to me. Yeah. And most people don't know that. I mean, I didn't know that until just a couple of years ago. And you just kind of assume, oh, I'm taking my money and putting it in the bank. And they will try to make you out to be some sort of prepper or paranoid, schizophrenic or whatever if you're somebody that says, oh, I'm just going to keep my money in my mattress. But in actuality, it's probably not a bad move, because at least you know where it is. At least you have access to it. At least you know that the bank isn't going to take your money and lend 9 times the amount out to their buddies, and then have nothing, be so undercapitalized that if you just get anything that spooks the public can start a bank run. here we have the coronavirus. Here's a prime example. Of course, it hasn't happened yet, but what we see when we sort of blend these two conspiracy worlds, the is this coronavirus real? And then you've got the banking system, and you start to hear on all the major networks, oh, well, you know what? Cash is really dirty, and it could be a carrier of the coronavirus. So we have to be careful and watch out for cash. Now, is that by design, or is it just, well, we do want to get rid of cash, and this seems like a pretty good excuse, so let's marry these two things together and make it another reason to do away with cash? They certainly want to get rid of cash. That has become crystal clear to anybody that's paying attention that it is not in their best interest to have a lot of cash out there floating around. They want to go digital. And that actually leads me to my next question, and that is, we're at Acapulco. You're doing a presentation. You're talking about cryptocurrency. Where there's a crypto stage component that is just dedicated to cryptocurrency. I don't know a ton about it. You do, and so it's great to have you on to talk about crypto. But my question is, we're fearful of what they'll do to us if we no longer have cash and they push us into some sort of digital currency. But then on the other hand, we like coins like Bitcoin or Monero or whatever, something that is privacy based. So what's the balancing act here between us wanting the security of a private cryptocurrency, but the downside of also being forced, maybe walking right into their, playing right into their hands and walking into this digital currency world?
Well, yeah, no, it's I definitely can see the fares, and with Bitcoin, of course, Bitcoin is fully traceable for people that are not aware. You know what was interesting when they first started Bitcoin is, it's all about privacy and all this stuff, but then it actually came out, and these guys that were touting privacy is now like, oh no, it's fully open. You can see a transaction that's going on, which, in certain examples that could be fine, but as long as it's not a sinister government that runs it. Or any entity that has ill intent towards any citizens within that system, they could just go in and then basically delete you out of the system if they want to. If they can find, for example, your private keys or something like that, and then they could create a code that you don't remember or something like that, and then it could have you out of that system. On the other hand, though, they really want the digital one world currencies, but I don't think it's going to be a one world one. I think it's going to be an overlay one that is going to be an SDR that nobody's going to use except for the mucky muck of multilateral corporations and governments. And then you're going to have the digital versions of the failed fiats, which is going to be the digital US dollar, the digital Canadian dollar, Australian dollar, Norwegian krona, whatever currency it might be. I think that's they really want to corral us into that. But then on the other hand, we are trying to fight back. Hopefully, there the people that are actually creating things like Monero and all these projects. Hopefully, they none of them has colluded, because conspiracies could happen potentially where you get corralled into something that looks like a great project with marketing. Usually now, though, because people are very aware of these things today, and especially in the crypto field, we could kind of spot hostile tries to take over, or hostile creations of crypto. Like look at Ripple, for example, that we call ripoff in the crypto world. It's just basically a printable blockchain. They call it a blockchain, but it's printable, so they could create X amounts of whatever amounts of currency that they want. Actually, Bank of Canada tried to do something called Project Jasper, where they were using Ripple, and they tried to make it to work with a digital cash system, and they couldn't. So they actually had to leave that. So now they're looking at other systems, and they're desperately trying to scramble, because as just actually 2 days ago, you had the Fed cut interest rates, then the Bank of Canada cut the interest rates the same amount, 0.5 today, and you had Australia just cutting 0.5. You have Britain looking at the same. So you have all these major central banks looking at cutting, and as when they get down to zero but a negative bound, the problem for them is that if they go negative, and this happened in Sweden and Switzerland and in Denmark especially, where people just went into cash and were hoarding cash because they didn't have the digital currency in place yet. So the problem was that people went out of, into cash, and there were strains to the banking system. They managed to keep those strains, so it didn't, collapse any banks. But there was a mass amount of cash, moving out of the system, because at least cash doesn't give you a negative return in form of, just to cash kind of thing. Like if you just look at, fiat to fiat basis, it didn't give you a negative return. But of course, if you keep it in fiat and you don't have gold, it's a negative return that way. So, of course, cash, the only thing about cash is that, it's privacy for us, that we can, you and me could do a cash transaction, and none of the, the taxmen can know anything about it. And that's why people like it. If you go to countries that have the highest amount of tax avoidance, it's the countries with the highest taxes. It's quite interesting how that works. And of course, on the top is, Turkey, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. All of them are at top 10 in tax avoidance. And of course, what's interesting, there's a book out there called The Curse of Cash by Kenneth Rogoff, former IMF economist. He basically created a policy on how to implement a cashless regime, and he had a whole bunch of suggestions. One of them, interestingly enough, talking about the coronavirus and dirty money, that was, the health problem with cash and coins in circulation. So that was that was actually number 3 in importance, other than, taxation was first. The second one was, of course, criminal activity, terrorist activities, as they call it, which is, us just doing transactions with each other and not wanting to share anything with the government.
Terrorist.
And then exactly. So that is what it is. So it's kind of like a war where you have a whole bunch of like different centralized projects that are trying to, show themselves as, oh yeah, we're, the next great cash system out there. You really got to be a part of this system. But then they turn out, if you go and look further into them, sometimes they have banks, backing them, and you have a whole bunch of sketchy people that are part of those projects. So you got to really pay attention. But at least today, my feel, from these digital systems that are more decentralized and uncontrollable by any central entity versus the more the centralized ones that they really want to implement. I think that there's, you really got to educate yourself on what's what out there, because you can, thread. I always have people, there's this meetup locally here where there's always like once every like 2 or 3 weeks, there's a guy coming in. It's like, yeah, Ripple is the best in the world of all cryptos. And then we're like, he basically gets shamed in public for that. But yeah, no, it's all about education here. And it's so important, like for the future of money and economics and the well-being of us as human beings, is that we actually do not fall for these the ease of use that you have. For example, like in Sweden, 13% as of it was 2018 were using cash, and it was 40% just 10 years ago. So it's been a severe drop there in Sweden, of course, and it's the ease of use, of course, of having a digital currency, just tapping instead of going through your book, like, I got to look up how much do I owe this guy kind of thing. So it's all about convenience. And that's why in the first place, why we replaced gold with these notes was convenience. It's all about convenience for human beings. And it's so easy to slip into the convenience part of it. But then the problem is like who's in control as the convenience is there. And usually people that have control over a centralized system, they would misuse it, severely usually, and it would fail.
Yeah. So yeah, they always sell it as a benefit to us, whatever it is. If it's, if it's, you name it, it's facial recognition cameras are there. It's a benefit. If your child gets lost, then we can find your child, because we've got it all plugged into this smart city. Of course, not telling you that it's also surveilling you, but
and never got a credit score attached to it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
so the push for convenience away from cash and into crypto could be a negative thing, but then you've got Bitcoin and the concept behind that of blockchain, and it seems to me. After now going to 2 of these conferences where people are talking about crypto and blockchain and everything, that the Bitcoin component is nice, and that's one part of it. But the blockchain aspect might be something that is able to scale up in not just currency, but into a variety of different things. What is the architecture or the backbone of blockchain that makes it so unique and special?
Well, I think what it makes special is the number one thing is decentralization of information. I think that's the number one key here. So, if one, for example, node that has information goes down, there's hundreds of thousands of others that hold that same information. Let's say that you had let's put it to the extreme here. So let's say that we had a solar flare that's going to fry most computers. But then one smart guy had, his a USB stick with the whole blockchain on in a Faraday cage, which it didn't let the sun rays go through it and destroy the circuitry in there. So now, if you had just one guy with one available blockchain, he basically have everything that you need to have the system back up and running again in a short period of time potentially. So there's tremendous, for blockchain itself, there's tremendous, advantage of having decentralized. And it's interesting throughout history, humans like to, and it comes back to convenience again. We like to go from, centralized, look at computers. So we went from the terminal that had a centralized storage unit at a location, you're working, usually in a corporate setting, you had a server that had all the hard drives on it. So it was just basically a stupid terminal. Then we went to the personal computer. So now we actually stored things on our own hard drives, which was fantastic. We could keep things for ourselves. Nobody could, get to it if you have it disconnected from the internet. So it's really, really cool. We decentralized because, again, it was great convenience. But then, I don't know if it was a push from the people that, want control. But then, the convenience of not having a hard drive in your computer, well, you still have it. But most people that, if you're not aware, on your computer, if you don't look at your computer, what's going on, or your iPhone, most times they try to push you to use their cloud service. So basically, everything is stored at a data center somewhere in the world, in Norway or in Canada or whatever that data center is. That information is stored at this data center. And they say, it's a convenience because if your computer gets destroyed, the information is still out there for you. Instead of you having a hard drive that you can, of course, back up onto another hard drive that you have at a safe place, for example. So it's all about convenience. So we're going back towards this storage on a centralized basis again. And the problem now is that there's so much centralized control. For example, all the information that the NSA grabs into these data centers that they have, it's just they have everything at one data center or a couple of data centers, right? So like the information gets centralized, and when that happens with information, of course, it's easier to then target that information and to eradicate it, for example. So if you only have it stored at one or two locations, well, now we could blow up those two data centers, and basically the information is gone. So it's a huge problem because we always want this convenience back in our lives, and it feels so convenient to store stuff in at a place where it's all taken care of, and you could just back it back up again if you need it. But again, I feel that now people are starting to wake up to this. They're constantly surveilled. They're getting fed up by it because we initially, thought that not me anymore, but people initially thought that, the government was there for their own good, to take care of things. But the problem over time, any government or any fiat currency, whatever it is, it's all convenience, right? So there's always, tiny little government easily turns into a bigger government. And it's throughout history, you have the same thing with centralization and decentralization of governance, of money, and everything. So everything flows, in a manner of people get to that totalitarian control somehow, and then they don't want that because it's so controlled and they're not free anymore. So human beings, I believe, like innate in our soul, I think that we have that thrive. Even though how terrible we are as people, we still want to have that freedom where we don't need to be under control or under surveillance or anything like that. So I think that whole move, but with the blockchain is just great because it's going back to decentralization, and potentially if we get it to work properly, there's decentralized storage services, for example, IPFS it's called. One of my friends, Ernest Hancock, has actually uploaded. Who was it? It was James Corbett. It was Luke Rudowski. It was Josh and me at World Alternative Media, and a couple of other Dan Dix, I believe, and a whole bunch of other YouTube channels onto the system. It's still quite slow, but it's basically decentralized at a ton of different servers around the world, and you could just add on servers in the thousands or millions if you wanted to onto that system. So I think that's the future that blockchain could play as a benefit to us, of course, where you have the decentralization aspect of it. But then, of course, you have centralized blockchains that is going to be a part of this whole equation, and that's where you have governments like China just loves this, where you can tokenize everything. All assets in the world basically are tokenized. All commodities, everything has a token attached to it. But that token is under control over the government, so they could see and then trace whatever activities or how those moves around in the economy. So there's those two aspects. But the great thing is that blockchain could create a whole amount of different things that could create true freedom for people, but then it also can create total enslavement for us as well. So it's a two-edged sword, if you can call it, where you have, total freedom on the one side and then total tyranny on the other side of it. So yeah, I think that, it's a great tool, but then we also got to warn ourselves on the potential misuses that, there will definitely be tried to have had with, using the blockchain technology.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like we want community as human beings, but then we also want privacy.
Yeah.
So we have this battle, and like you talked about it being the pendulum swinging from one side to the other. I could imagine that that the United States government, or any government really, but especially the United States government, would hate the idea of decentralization of anything, seeing what control freaks they are and what paranoid schizophrenics they act like, because they want to centralize everything and keep it, under their. I mean, we say we're like a democratic republic or whatever.
More like corporate fascists, to be honest.
Exactly. It's corporate fascists. And they want to have this control, and the idea of people breaking free from that control, be it decentralizing on a blockchain or having cash or having free thoughts, or, Ernest Hancock decentralizing servers to store videos everywhere. I mean, the idea of that probably gives them, night sweats that the people will actually do something on their own, or they're going to think for themselves, or they're going to break away from daddy government and don't need them. I think they fear that they'll become, that they know that once people move off and decentralize and move away from them, they'll realize that the government structure that they've been living under is totally obsolete, and they're completely unnecessary. They do nothing but suck away your money, take your rights, give you nothing in return. It's like an abusive relationship you would never tolerate with any human being. But for some reason, we tend to think that, it's okay because, like you said, you don't believe this anymore. But there was a time when all of us thought, well, government's here to take care of us. I mean, that's what they do, right? They come in and I can't think of a time when the government has come in to take care of us in a long, long time, unless by taking care of us, you mean getting bombs dropped on your head or getting thrown in jail for growing vegetables in your front yard or something like that, something crazy.
Or getting it to live on welfare, so that you become a slave basically of the government. One interesting thing, it's not a blockchain, but actually they created their own blockchain token now. It's BitTorrent. BitTorrent is, illegal file sharing, of movies and all this stuff. But, they tried for, I don't know how many years. I remember using it, how far back now, like 12, like almost 20 years ago, the versions of it. And, they can't stop it because it's decentralized, right? So that's the power of decentralization. Now, we have examples of not necessarily blockchain, but it is there to show us that it's possible for a decentralized autonomous entity to function without any government can come in and control it or take it over, because there's mass amounts of servers and information everywhere that they just can't control.
Yeah. Well, we're at this point where we've got now, by estimates, the official number, $21 trillion of debt in the United States. You've got, or 24 trillion or whatever it is now. Catherine Austin Fitts and Mark Skidmore have done outstanding research and found that there's another $21 trillion that has just gone missing through the Department of Defense and HUD. And Exchange Stabilization Fund, slush money war chest. Yep. So where is this money going? It's going somewhere. And when you talk about fractional reserve banking and the creation of 9 or 10 times the amount of money from just a simple deposit, how can we ever know how much money is actually out there in any real way?
Well, like there's measures, and what's interesting with the money measures, like for example M0, which is cash and coins in circulation, but that turned into also being central bank electronic reserve, so that number isn't real anymore. Then you got M1, which is just basically you add on bank account and so on, and then you got M2 and M3. Actually, the United States stopped measuring M3 because it showed such a high number, so they didn't want that. So they actually cut off M3 from their measurements. They still actually have the data available to people, but they actually cut it off because it was such a high number. But there's guys like Shadow Stats and what is it?
John Williams
that have that information available to people. But then of course you never know, because this guys like I don't know if you know Rob Kirby. He believes that it is in the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and who knows, right? Because this is the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This was actually a U.S. government accountability office. It was what is it called? The Exchange Stabilization Fund expenditures for personnel support. This one, so they actually show, like here in this article, they actually show all their trading desks around the world that they have. And it's interesting, they have this is all, though. This is from, like, let's see, when how far back is this? Looking at the 70s now. Mm-hmm. And this is, they had financial attaché. Actually, there's Office of International Monetary Affairs under the ESF, where they have the financial attaché in Bonn, in London, Paris, Rome, Tokyo, and one saying Paris OECD. Then they have the Office of Bilateral Development, which is they have financial attachés in Hong Kong, Brasilia, Mexico City, New Delhi, Manila, and so on. So, like, who knows what they've done with this, and all these, talking about derivatives and off balance sheets, books, and so on. Think about, like, it was interesting because what happened just, I think it was a couple of years ago. So, I think it was suddenly Belgium showed up with $300 billion worth of U.S. treasuries that they bought, the tiny little nation of Belgium. And then you had a whole bunch showing up as owned under, Cayman corporations. Mm-hmm. So they have all these, they create these corporations, the shell corporations, and then they hide within those. Who knows what they could have hidden within those. And then they might have, looking at, what Tim is doing with the whole trust structure and so on, you could use that for very sinister things as well, and not just hide money from the government, but you could use it to hide and offshore money somewhere that nobody can account for potentially. So who knows? It might potentially, be hidden somewhere around the world in different little funds, or it might be a private front of something. Who knows what they put this money into potentially, and where it is. But that's kind of like if that money does exist, the 21 trillion. That's what I think they would do with that money, because there's no other way for them to really, hide it other than creating all these weird shell corporations and, hiding them in offshore locations potentially. That's what I think, anyways. And of course, you have guys like the IMF. I just got to show the viewers this, because this is actually remember we were talking about this when I was over there, but this is actually the user manual. The user guide for the SDR, and it's a manual of transactions and operations in SDRs, and it's issued by the Treasury Department of the International Monetary Fund. So this is what every Treasury Secretary, including the Exchange Stabilization Fund, is who holds all the SDRs in the United States. They are the ones that actually have this manual that shows exactly how the SDR works. Now, I was lucky because these two books here, I wouldn't be able to get them probably, most likely. One of these was like online. I was lucky to get it for like $400, this one. But suddenly it got up to $8,000 they wanted for one of these. I guess they got a couple of them. Then they saw like, oh, somebody wants these, because it was taken out of libraries, somewhere. And this one here was taken out of the Henning C. Randall, the exchange. No, let's see here. It was, Steen Library in the United States. And then we have this guy here was taken out of the Hartford Graduate Center library in Hartford, Connecticut. Actually, we had the Red Pill Expo in Hartford, Connecticut last year. So, how these sinister things here happens, without us understanding anything that's going on. But this is the, the big level stuff that they're basically hiding and sifting off money into organizations, that are that they use, as fronts or just pure hidden. Well, they call them dark pools sometimes, in the financial world, where it's basically not registered on anywhere in statistics or anything. So you can't really trace that money. So potentially all that money could, lay anywhere around the world, and we wouldn't even have a clue. It could be, even stored somewhere and electronically in a, in a safe location. Who knows what they could have done with it? But that's just some of my assumptions about it, anyways.
There's a great documentary called The Spider's Web, which talks about banking. Talks about the city of London, and they make the point that they feel like the British Empire might have gone away. The overt, visible rule of the British Empire dissolved, but it never really went away in terms of their banking reach through their offshore havens in Bermuda and Cayman Islands and Jersey and Guernsey and all these places, these hubs that have very difficult to follow. They have different banking laws that make it almost impossible to track the money. You've got 57,000 corporations operating out of one building, and all these bankers, they're just doing their thing, just laundering and just washing money through these shell corporations. And it makes you think that there's, so Jeffrey Epstein winds up in the news, and he's got 500, he's worth $500 million. And well, who knows how much money the guy has? If he's living in the Virgin Islands, which is another tax haven, who knows how much money is flowing through those obscure little countries and coming out the other side clean and with a new owner.
Bunker. He has a bunker on his island.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy that these guys they're smart. The bankers they're very smart, of course, but they're evil, and it human nature kicks in, and it just seems that when you've got the ability to create all this money, you somehow find yourself getting greedy and screwing it all up, and it seems like banking collapses. Obviously, you talked about the Chinese having printing bills back in the 1000s, and having bank runs and having collapses them. So it seems like it's not even it's a combination of two things. It's human nature and just the way the system is built. And you put those two things together and you wind up having collapses all the time. So here we are in the United States. We've got the dollar as the world's reserve currency. It's not backed by gold. It's not. I think a case can be made that it is backed by the U.S. military, but even that
I totally
goes
agree.
so far. So we're all going to act surprised when the Fed runs out of money. We've seen QE, QE2, 3, 4, QE to infinity, repo purchases, whatever, just a new name for monetizing debt and figuring out new ways and just trying to stave off this impending collapse that's coming. So what do you think about where we're headed in terms of this? I mean, every Ponzi scheme has to come to an end at some point. Where are we on the scale of in terms of the United States dollar?
Yeah. I think you're wrong on one thing, sorry, but it's funny. You laugh about it because the Fed will never run out of money.
Well, that's true. Right. The value of the money that they print. It'd be like you've got this great collection of physical bills. You've got the $1 trillion Zimbabwe note or whatever it is.
No, exactly. That's exactly what's going to happen, right? Like they won't run out of money, but they will run out of trust.
Right.
Because trust is theirs, and when it comes to people and trusting something, well, if suddenly the thing is with these idiots that are that are PhD economists today, they're brainwashed basically by the elites, in these PhD programs to believe that, we could just print money out of thin air until, what was it? Paul Krugman, was saying that, money is debt that we owe to ourselves. Basically, that's what he said. So he believes that if you just print infinite amounts of money over time and there's no problem. The problem is that these bozos don't understand is that when they centrally control something, over time, there'll be disconnects between the raise in salaries and the money creation. And as that, and as you corrupt, you have the corporations can't function the way they are. So they got to, cut off people and lay off people, or they got to pay people, they can't pay people more over a certain extent of time. Well, now suddenly you have the underlying inflation, that are not even close to 2%. Here in Canada, I was looking at our even our M1, I think it was up 117% over the last 10 years. So that's 11% on an annual basis. Meanwhile, the government tells us we're 1.75 to 2% inflation. And that's just bank accounts and physical cash and so on in circulation. So where that disconnect comes in, well, it comes in the way they manipulate the how they calculate the inflation, of course, and all those things. But again, you can't trust these people, and of course they rely on the trust of us. In that, the US dollar, any currency has value. Now you're seeing actually a breakdown over the last 10 years, I would say, but it's really become more rampant over the last 4 years, 3-4 years, where you see people just exiting out of using the US dollar as a medium of exchange. You have a lot of nations, going what's called cross-currency swaps. So they basically use their currencies instead of going through the US dollar system to avoid, because they are seeing that the US dollar is even that they ship all the dollars overseas, the American empire, and that's how they got away with, having mass inflation, because if they kept all this money in the United States, there would be hyperinflation almost in the United States in the monetary supply. So the currency would be so much more worthless than it is currently, but they've been able to shove it, outside of its borders, so you don't really see the heavy inflation. But over time, the other nations are now seeing that the currency that they hold on the other side of the border, now that is starting to lose value for them as well. So even that, they think that they have had control and everything was fine, now they're starting to distrust the currency having a value. An interesting point, this is a book that I have that I call The History of Fiat Paper Money. And I forgot who the guy was that wrote it again, but very brilliant guy. I think he died, unfortunately. He was interviewed once by one guy that barely got any views, but I was like probably one of the 10 views that he got. Right. But in that book, it was just fantastic. He laid out, the whole history of things. And sorry, now and I totally forgot my train of thought. What was I talking about, Charlie?
Well, we were one of the things we're just talking about, rampant inflation. I mean, it'd be one thing if you had. I mean, we've got the inflation numbers, which are a lie, and then we know that the actual inflation is much higher than that. But one of the things that seems to be a problem is that wage growth isn't matching it. It's not, it's too small. So you wind up the wages of the average earner are staying, they're growing, just a minimal amount. Meanwhile, inflation is going, and then you wind up in a situation where we are right now in the United States, which is people can't make their monthly payments on things. So they're using credit cards as a means to bridge the gap between what their monthly allowances are. And that is obviously going to end badly for everyone. And we've got over, trillions of dollars of personal debt, student loan debt, all these things. It seems like the
government is growing with taxation on top
What's that?
of that. Right? Yeah, the government is growing on top of that, making you pay more taxes. right? So, yeah.
It's a dirty system. I think it feels like we're waking up to it, but what can we do? So I guess we'll end it with this. Like, so if we're just normal people out here and we're trying to figure out what's going on, we feel like the dollar is potentially falling apart, and of course the dollar is tied to every other currency in one way or another. And if we've got some sort of collapse here coming, I mean, what is the solution to this? Is it physical gold and silver? Is it crypto? Is it cash into your mattress? Like, what would somebody do to put themselves in a position so that everybody's going to get hurt, but to get hurt the least amount?
Yeah, no, of course I gotta make the disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor, so this is only my opinion.
Shitload about money. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have a lot of financial advisors actually listen to me, and I got a lot of them to understand and actually get their people to get their customers fully diversified, not just diversified in stocks and bonds that they usually do. So it's all about that, but important to look at. So if we do look at currency collapses throughout history, it's important to see how did it work out for people around the world. And usually I actually one of my friends that I work with here that unfortunately he moved, his Croatian guy that now moved to Ottawa, Ante, he was explaining me, because he lived in Yugoslavia in the 90s when the hyperinflation of the Yugoslavian dinar happened and the war that came after the hyperinflation. He was saying that they were lucky, they lived on a farm, so they were self-sufficient. They didn't live great, he said. Like, it wasn't fantastic or anything, but they actually had the necessary food and water, all that supply, in order to take care of themselves throughout that whole crisis. Because when money becomes so rapidly invaluable, there's no point of making any salaries in it or anything, right? It's like Venezuela, for example. There's people that were government employees that they got a $3,000 increase in minimum wage, but then they actually, instead of working for the government, because inflation was just so way more than that 3,000%, they actually started to just sell commodities to people. So like one lady, she was actually walking around and selling coffee, making 100 times more than she would for the government, basically.
Wow.
So that just shows you, the most important things throughout any currency collapse is what is value to human beings, commodities that we use and that we need for food and to keep ourselves alive, of course, and then things that we need like wood, all kinds of different commodities that we use to build things. All these things are the important things. When you look at something has gone up in value, no, it hasn't gone up in value. The currency has lost value, most likely, or there's a natural supply and demand different. For example, one funny thing that was a warning with gold and silver, for example, used that as money. The Spaniards went and robbed the Aztecs back in the day of all their gold and silver, and they thought that they're going to be very wealthy, so they brought it over to Spain. But now suddenly, I think it was gold prices mostly just collapsed because they thought that that would bring in an overabundance of wealth to the world. It's like there's apparently a gold meteorite out there that's wants to grab and then harvest. Well, that's going to be a problem for the actual price of gold, for example. Gold is great because it actually keeps its form and shape, and it never corrodes throughout its lifetime. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a godlike metal in that sense, where it's always around. And I think that's the number one reason why gold has kept its way over 5,000. Who knows before that? Josh is our friend Josh Sigurdsson is talking about ancient civilizations. Who knows how far back they might have even known about this, maybe even further back. We don't really know or understand, because over time, I guess you can, we've been digging out some civilizations and not finding gold and silver further back. So that is, maybe they didn't do that, but at least, in modern, like last 5,000 years, we use gold and silver as money because it's abundant and it's malleable. We could easily make it into certain sizes and so on to make it easy to transact between people. So that is of course another thing that's always to keep that, like through hyperinflations. My friend from from Croatia. He said that the people that had gold and silver that he knew, they actually were the ones that were owning everything after. So again, and this is a warning too, because you probably have the guys like the Rockefellers and all those families, lining up their portfolios with, on top of having other things, but they line it up with gold and silver because they want to be able to still control the society on the other side. The thing is, the more of us that have gold and silver, the more can be more powerful and then stop, their control potentially that they want to implement with a newer system and so on. For example, a government having a gold standard is a fraud. They've never been able to. They say that gold standards always fails. No, it's actually the government that fails, or the currency that fails, because they're overprinted. But the importance of having food and all those things that are important. And then if you go and look locally, for example, what is needed where you live, for example, Charlie, what is important to your community? What is the top 5 commodities that your community needs and are need of or use as more, compared to, for example, where I live in Manitoba, we might have a different types of commodities or things that we find valuable compared to where you live. So it's different from place to place. That's an important thing to know. Having commodities, having the possibility to feed yourself throughout, especially currency reset, currency collapse that could turn into real dark ages over a year or two in worst case scenario, or it could turn into a complete totalitarian regime. So how are you going to exit out of that regime? Are you going to run away? Do you have some place to go, for example? All those different things that you got to look at, to protect yourself. So gold and silver is the base for me. Then you get into cryptos, of course. Cryptocurrencies are important in ways that they could be there in cases of bank runs, for example. They're not confiscatable very easily. And, as the banks, let's say that, you had a bank account, you had $100,000 in it. Well, if they put like a $60 capital control, which they have in many countries, like Lebanon just recently implemented because they had bank runs. Cyprus have had it, Italy, Greece, a whole bunch of other places have implemented capital controls when there are bank runs that are happening. So they stop you and limited you from taking out physical cash because that's their Achilles heel. Remember, we were talking about that. So that's the number one thing, to have an easy medium of transaction other than gold and silver. It might be harder to transfer that as a medium of value. For bigger purchases, it's easier probably to do it. But when it comes to smaller purchases or everyday, food and all that stuff, it's easier to have, some form of crypto that are decentralized and not printable. That's the number one important thing is it can't be printed into, 10 times more in existence, because then it's nothing better than, fiat currencies. Other than that, there's, have your own land that you could, grow things on. That is, an important thing, I think, throughout, either a devaluation or a collapse in currencies and to hyperinflation. It's very important to have. When it comes to, I'm trying to think of any other things that might be important. We talked about just the importance of commodities, food, water, shelter, gold, silver. We talked about crypto. I would say cash even, have cash. For example, if this corona panic, gets full blown, we know how the government is going to react. They're going to quarantine you in a city, and suddenly you're sitting now. There's northern parts of Italy, and Iran hasn't really done too much to it. They're trying to be forced into, doing a whole bunch of things. But in Italy, the World Health Organization has pressured the local governments to quarantine people, so you can't do anything for sometimes up to 2-3 weeks, where you're locked into, your own place. You're not allowed to move out. And let's say that they go as crazy as China, which is insane, where they lock down, cities. I think there were as much as 40, 50 million people at least that was quarantined. Who knows how many there are now? And it's just a full halt in the economy. If you get to that point, it's very good to have, supplies of food and water to be able to feed yourself throughout times and natural disaster, anything. So it's good to be like a little bit self-reliant in a way. And you see in governments actually having to do that now, where it's not about government anymore. You hear a lot of governments having to say like, oh, you got to be prepared for something happening. So governments are, afraid because they can't, give anything for free. They know that if they try to, they're going to print too much money, and then the currency is bust as well on top of what they're trying to do. So, it's important to hold real things, I think, throughout a currency crisis, and owning, a home is well, really good, as long as you don't like if we go into hyperinflation, it's fantastic to own a home with debt on it, for example. Right. If you're an investor and you went into hyperinflation, I think the bank would try, because I think I've seen that before in other countries where they try to actually because of hyperinflation, they said like, no, wait here. We're not going to let you get off with our failure in our currency system. So they basically, upped the value of the actual home to real, because of hyperinflation. So that might not be, it might be backfire on you if you think that might work. But it's good because you could potentially, before that get implemented, you could pay off your house quite easily if you hold things that actually go up in value when the currency really dips in value, right? And one last thing, it's for something like this to happen, it just takes like 1 year, and it's the start of any failure in any currency, Charlie, is when people stop trusting that it could be used as a medium or exchange for economic activity. That's it, and then 1 year it's gone, and there's no failure. There's no hyperinflation that lasted over 10 years. Only a year or less, sometimes under a month or less. So always, it happens fast when it happens. So people that believe that, gold is going to go up gradually to 2, 3, 4, 5,000. No, it's going to probably happen in an instant. And if you don't have it and you want to get it, potentially, there's not going to even be a price to buy it for, because nobody wants to have, everybody has their gold now and whoever had the gold, save their purchasing power, basically.
Yeah. Well, Catherine Austin Fitz always says, you got to have gold coins to bribe the border guards to get out of the country. So exactly. He is John Thore Sneisen. He has forgotten more about currency than most of us will ever know. Tell the people where they can get your book.
Yeah, books, I would say the best way to get it is if you don't like Amazon, you could get them on Amazon. They're available there. But if you don't believe in the sinister corporation of Amazon, I do have them on my own website, so you could order them directly from me there on theeconomictruth.org. And there you can find anything that I do, anything with Tim, with Josh, anything that I do, I basically try to put up there on my website now. So it's all available, all the information that I'm dealing with, all my social media that I have information on, all these things that are available that I've done throughout the last 10 years now is all available there. So it's I would say that's the number one place to go. You could go, of course, and check World Alternative Media. And then now, of course, me and Tim, because of the financial crisis, we're doing our Tim and John show, where we basically have an hour where we go into things like actually very similar to this almost, a little bit more detailed, of course. But me and Tim, if you want to really dive deep into economics, me and Tim are now, we have 3 shows already. We're going to have lots more, especially now with the financial crisis. It seems like things are starting to really fall apart here. So I go and check everything again. It's, on theeconomictruth.org.
Awesome. And if you like this show, please share it with your friends and family on social media and places like that, because God knows they're not going to do us any favors by promoting it. And you can check out my website, theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. John, thanks so much for enlightening us and educating us on all this difficult but important things that we need to know about this world moving forward. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Charlie. Really, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You got it.